with this intimate group, let's make it as interactive as you guys are up for. So cut us off, interrupt us, challenge us. So we think this is a really interesting study. We're excited about sharing it with you. I'm Mike Weller with Verizon. I'll describe my role here in a moment. Dave?
Hi, everybody. I'm Dave Weinand with Incisiv.
A couple of years ago, Incisiv and Verizon came together to try to get a sense of what was going on in the market through a technology lens. Excuse me. And what we're going to be talking about today is the second report. Great time for the frog to kick up. So first of all, we'll start by, Dave, why don't you describe your role at Incisiv and what Incisiv does?
Sure. So nice to see everybody. Incisiv is a boutique research and insights firm. So we do many different kinds of research throughout many different industries. The core of and our genesis we came up through kind of retail brands, consumer products, and manufacturing. So we do, by and large, ongoing studies around people, processes, and technology in the industry. We have another side of our business that I won't, it's not really relevant to this, but we also do a lot of benchmarking, like digital maturity benchmarking. So we'll look at who's best in class in certain environments and provide details on that to kind of the industry. So the model is for us to work with both operators as well as some of our partners like Verizon to kind of put this out into the market and offer it to, for you guys to help, do your jobs better. So who doesn't know Verizon? Verizon's obviously a massive player in the industry, wireless, all sorts of other services. But in terms of what the role of Verizon is in the world we're all sitting, here in Maryland to talk about distribution and supply chain and all that kind of stuff, Mike, just give us a little bit of background in terms of kind of how you guys play there.
Sure. It's not uncommon for us over the last couple of years to go to an industrial conference and people wonder why we're here. While we're known for the consumer brand, Verizon Business is a surprisingly large entity within Verizon. We're over $20 billion with over 20,000 employees, serving a wide range of private sector and public sector customers. One of the things that our group does is we focus on the so what part of a project. That so often what you deal with when you deal with a technology vendor is there's a lot of focus on the what it's going to do and the how it's going to do it, which leads to a lot of maybe interesting conversations, but not necessarily productive conversations. If you can address the business outcome with some type of a measurable result and address that so what part, we can have much more interesting conversations. So what my group does is we focus on the use cases that can be enabled by some of these solutions, but we're hyper-focused on the business impact. So when we go into a distribution center or a warehouse or a plant, we're really trying to figure out if we could do this, is it going to pass that so what test? So I spend a lot of time in those types of environments coaching Verizon teams on how to do it, but we're also doing a lot of that work directly ourselves.
Yeah, and it's critical. Obviously, we do a lot of work with solution providers across the whole spectrum, and we often advise many of them, especially on the younger side, that it's not feature function, it's business impact. Because folks with technology companies that have some interesting technology, but they're more concerned about the technology versus the business impact. So good.
And we tried to do that with the study. We tried to when we partner with Incisiv on this, is to identify what are some compelling questions, what are the types of things that you guys would want to know, and try to get to that next layer of insight to make it more meaningful. So Dave, why don't you talk a little bit about the study itself, some of the basics of it, the participants and the types of questions and such.
Sure. So as I mentioned, we cover a lot of different industries and different segments within industries. So, historically, distribution, supply chain, logistics, historically we're kind of technology laggards. It's all about we're operators, and it's about the people, which it still is, but technology has a lot to say about it. So, and what we're seeing now is the segment is going through a lot of the same kind of changes that we're seeing with some of our other industries that we cover, which is a good thing. Ultimately, changes in labor, and we'll get into this in the study. Lots of issues around labor, and then of course automation is kind of the word of the day for the industry. So that's really really seeing automation kind of really kick in, and we'll get into it in the study again. So just from the perspective, as Mike said, it's our second year of the study. The first is really kind of setting the baseline. What are the kind of challenges, the worries, the concerns, or the opportunities that the industry sees around automation, around things like AI? I'm sure you haven't heard those two letters much this week, have you? But what we've seen, and we'll get into it, is that AI automation kind of has gone from kind of pie in the sky, art of the possible, to like, okay, now we can really actually get stuff done. So that's really encouraging, and I'm sure you've heard a lot of that in terms of the last couple of days here too. So just from the perspective of what the study covered, it was, it's pretty broad. We split it pretty evenly, as you see, from manufacturing, logistics, warehouse executives, and then kind of retail DC executives. So wanted to have that kind of dual perspective out there, and then look at a pretty broad swath in terms of company size and executive titles. So that's kind of the study. We can dive into it now. So from your perspective, so this study, David, this is going to be released this week?
It's probably going to be in the next 2 weeks.
Okay. It's close, but this covers quite a bit. We're not going to get to it all today, but I'd love from you, Mike, perspective, what are your key takeaways that you
Sure.
took from it?
One of the things that surprised us to a degree was the amount of supply chain disruption that still persists. That there's kind of these almost a dual conception. Some think that the supply chain issues coming out of the pandemic that we're, quote, back to normal. Clearly, the study indicates that we're not anywhere close back to normal, given the preponderance of people that indicated supply chain disruptions were still top of list, top of mind. One of the things that struck us too was that the conversion from fork trucks to some type of automated vehicle, that trend is accelerating. We'll touch on that a little bit as well. I think the last thing to what David said here is that automation and AI are absolutely top of mind, but the study is indicating that the enablers for that, whether it's connectivity or security or integration, are coming to the forefront, because it's a great thing in concept to be able to activate those, but there's a lot of pieces and parts and processes that have to be adjusted behind the scenes or as a foundational layer to do that. So what we wind up finding out when we go into a distribution center or a warehouse, there's no shortage of great ideas for what could be done. There's just a concern about what are the unintended consequences, what are the costs that are going to be and unanticipated, they're going to have to be dealt with, and how much business impact is there going to be in the beginning? How can we create quick enough wins that are impactful enough to continue to move things forward? How do we balance simplicity versus complexity? Because if you're going to introduce something like AI and even automation, obviously, there are a lot of interdependencies that have to come out of that. So we're finding the customers are really trying to figure out, how can I get that technology foundation so that I can make this transition with more AI and more advanced automation possible? So those were our big three.
Yeah. And as you see, so, from a challenges perspective, nothing earth-shattering here in terms of year on year, in terms of the data. But, to Mike's point, supply chain disruptions, obviously we've gone from COVID-era disruptions now to tariff disruptions, so not surprising that it's still the number one priority. But as you see, labor and workforce is still super important. The other piece that's not so much on this is that we're really seeing that the enablement of workers through mobility is pretty much heading toward ubiquity. It's just more efficient to equip, whether it's drivers or warehouse workers, or whatever, with mobile devices. So from the perspective of technology, we can talk about AI and automation, but this little thing still kind of rules the day, and it's becoming, like I said, it's ubiquitous, and so that's just something to keep in mind, because what that ultimately means is a load on network infrastructure, but we'll get into that in just a bit. So.
What did you find from the year-over-year information? What jumped out at Incisiv?
I think, I mean, just from, like I said, the ubiquity of mobile, some of the challenges that are, that, you know, AI is a big word, and there's lots of versions of it, because it's hard to say AI, and you have to really narrow it down. And from the perspective of this segment in this industry, you know, machine learning and computer vision is AI. And that's really an area where, you know, computer vision is providing some really big benefits to the segment. And, you know, I don't think, Gen AI and, those types of tools, they're going to, they're going to get a lot of adoption eventually. But I think you got to think about the stuff that's been around a while. And that's like computer vision and machine learning and things like that. So
I think there's some misconceptions too when we talk about mobile, and the knee-jerk reaction is to think about this, but think about any connected device that is portable, that can move around. It could be a scanner, it could be a barcode reader, it could be an AMR or an AGV for that matter. So anything in motion, it could be a tool. There's lots of elements now. It could be a wearable device. The list goes on and on. So that aspect of what is a mobile asset and defining it for your own organization in a way that everybody's on the same page. We ask customers very frequently, what are you calling it? Are you calling it a distribution center of the future? Are you calling it a smart warehouse? What's the term you're going to use? Is it Industry 4.0? Is it digital transformation? And then once you get that common definition, how are you defining the terms so that everybody's off the same sheet of music? So things like mobile, everybody brings their own definition. The same thing with AI. When we talk about integration, there's obviously a lot of systems that have to come together with WMS and WES and fleet management and all sorts of things that have to go on in your environments. But when you apply AI on top of that, then it gets into compute issues. Where are we going to have the compute and the processing power that we need to do all of this? And how sensitive to latency and long round trips to the cloud is that going to require? Because what we're finding is that the more we're going to layer in these additional use cases, that challenge becomes, we don't have to just integrate these, we have to provide some processing where it makes sense. And I don't think very many people want to build out data centers and larger server rooms in the distribution centers. That kind of goes counterclockwise to what everybody's trying to accomplish with efficiency, right? So how do you balance where the compute has to happen with where the compute has to be supporting and delivering the latency that you're going to require for different types of especially with AI applications? If you're going to have a vehicle, for example, it's going to be homed to some type of computer and it's very sensitive to the directions it's going to get or the reactions it's going to have. You want that compute as close as possible. So the emergence of some concepts known as near-edge compute or edge compute start to come into play, and that fits into this integration conversation. The last thing I want to touch on that Dave said regarding the terms here is computer vision, video analytics, whatever you choose to call it. There's a lot of, and we saw this in the study, that a lot of organizations indicated that they had computer vision because they had some surveillance cameras. And because the surveillance camera was doing some video processing and we weren't having a security person look at the images, that was computer vision. And yes, technically it is. But when you expand that to all of the things that are possible with computer vision, and we'll be touching on that in a few minutes, there's a wide range of things that should be expanding the aperture, pun intended, with computer vision. So it's getting to those common terms that we think are going to be really critical in defining use cases and getting everybody on the same page.
Yeah. And, again, not that these data points are like dramatically different, but you do see the technology integration. I think it was the highest kind of year-on-year growth. And we see the reason for that is as you start to adopt AI applications, as I'm sure you've heard this week or other places, it's all about the data. So you've got to get, you've got to integrate these systems so that there's one source of the truth. And ultimately, that integration piece becomes even more critical.
Yeah.
So you touched on automated material handling, those types of things. Let's get into that a little bit and talk about that.
Yeah, that one struck me a little bit because there's a lot of discussion around automated vehicles and the adoption rate of these. And we've seen that the perception seems to be lagging in terms of the adoption rate. There seems to be a lot adopted, but at the other hand, we go in and we see and not a whole lot of them. Sometimes there's pilots, sometimes there's a small fraction of them being used. So there's this perception that perhaps automated material handling isn't moving as fast as everybody would have expected. The report indicated the next 4 years, 5 years, there's going to be a significant increase in adoption rate. And in fact, with AMRs alone, it's going to increase fourfold. So what were some of your takeaways, Dave, with that in terms of this acceleration of the rate?
In fairness, the base is low, as you see. But ultimately, as technology becomes, prices come down and they become more integrated, I think we're going to the ASRS and the AMR data points will actually be greater. We partner with Verizon next year on this study. I think it'll be greater because, who here is using either automated sorting, retrieving, or automated robots? Anybody? Okay. So about 8% of you. Okay, perfect. See, the data is totally correct. Okay, but I think again, prices will come down, and ability and functionality will get enhanced. So it's going to happen. There are certain use cases where it may not. Where just traditional conveyor belts or forklifts will still rule the day. But by and large, obviously all you have to do is look at an Amazon DC and you'll know kind of directionally where it's headed. So that's from that perspective. I think it's a cool space, though.
That decline in forklifts really struck us, that 33% decline over the next 5 years. I don't know if that's grounded in reality, because there's an awful lot of things to overcome with that, but it's striking that even if it's indicative of a trend and it doesn't get to that point, there's a lot to be done in the next 5 years with how to reconcile that. When you have the Heisters of the world saying they're going to autonomous fork trucks as fast as they can, there's clearly something there. And one of the challenges is how do we repurpose those operators? Those are some of the most highly paid and perhaps highly skilled operators out on the floor. So is that something that we want to lose in this transition? So there's a lot of human factors and process issues, not to mention union issues associated with that.
And not for nothing, but 5 years is a long time right now, with as fast as things are moving. So it could be a little speculation. So we're going to get into we've been talking about kind of mobile workforce tool, and you gave a great description in terms of what does a mobile device really honestly mean. So we're going to go into a little bit in terms of the kind of the adoption of mobile devices in the workforce. So talk a little bit about this slide and kind of what your thoughts are.
Yeah, sure. We go into a lot of environments and we frequently hear people talking about they're going to digitize their operations and they're going to have a digital floor, whatever term that they're using, but it usually starts with digital. And the thing that strikes us is that you can do all the digital you want, but if your people are your most important asset and they don't have a digital tool with them, are you really digitizing your operation? So there's kind of not a contradiction, but a challenge in that we have to empower our people with digital tools if we're going to be truly digital out on the floor. Some functions lend themselves to digital more readily than others. Clearly, carrying this around can be a huge distraction. It can be a safety issue. There's all sorts of compelling reasons not to use it. What we're seeing is that there's more and more purpose-built handsets. For example, one of the common concerns we hear from distribution centers is, I don't want our people, listening to a podcast or listening to music or something like that while they're on the floor, because it's a safety risk, right? It's a distraction and productivity issue as well. But there are now a lot more industrial handsets that only serve the functions that they're required to do and can't access the internet. One of the interesting byproducts of that is if this can't access the internet and it can only do the functions associated with an industrial operation, it's much less of a flight risk at the end of the day because it doesn't do any good once it leaves. There are even handsets out there that don't have a dial pad. So they can embrace function buttons or something like that to move around. You can use them with work gloves on even. So there's a variety of things that are emerging in the ecosystem that may be appropriate for certain types of operations. The other concern we hear frequently, and this happens constantly, is we hear C-level people talking about, well, we digitize our operations because everybody on the floor has access to a tablet. And whether you mount the tablet in a fork truck or whether it's in a cradle or a bracket somewhere out on the floor, yes, it is a digital tool that is used in certain respects, but we frequently see that those tablets are gathering dust, especially the ones that aren't in a fork truck. The ones that are just in a bracket somewhere, they're not used because of either connectivity concerns, training considerations, that people haven't adapted. They're not going to carry it around. It's too big and bulky to carry around. So they get used on a limited basis. And one of the great reasons for people to not adopt using them is say, I can't use it in all parts of the DC. I go into this aisle, I go into this row, and I can't get a signal. So they don't use them. The other element of this.
Anybody have that issue?
Yeah. Does that pop up dead spots in the area? It can happen with macro coverage, and we'll touch on that in a little bit, and for cellular. It also can happen with Wi-Fi, because some of the fundamentals of Wi-Fi connectivity. So we see that. It's the fork trucks moving around with the tablets in them, they often encounter the dead spots as well. The bigger issue that we see with mobile devices is people carrying around scanners and barcode readers. That it's not uncommon for somebody to input something into that scanner or that tablet and then realize when they come back out into the main row that it didn't take, that there wasn't sufficient connectivity inside the aisle, so they had to retrace their steps. Lost productivity, often 10, 15, even 20 minutes of retracing steps and lost work as a result of that. So that builds an inherent lack of trust in the devices as well and gives people another reason to resist the adoption of the technology. So it's this kind of a symbiotic relationship between if you're going to give people a digital device, what they're going to expect is the reliability of what they get when they're out of work, when they're on their regular, life. So when they walk in and something like this only works intermittently, then it's disruptive for them, especially with all the digital natives that you're trying to hire. The Gen Z people that are typically being brought in now to replace seasoned, skilled workers that are retiring or moving on, is that you want to meet these people where they are, right? And it's very difficult to ask somebody who spends 24 hours a day, largely tethered to this, to put it in a locker and then engage with the world in a different way, right? So what we do when we go into a DC is when we can, we'll ask the younger workers, you have a problem on the floor. You have a choice. You can A, walk around and find a lead or a supervisor and tell them what the issue is. B, you can key in on a two-way radio and let everybody on the channel know that you've got a problem and you're broadcasting, you don't know something. Or C, pull down a video on a handset or a tablet so you can figure it out yourself. The answer is obvious, right? Gen Zers, by and large, are going to pick option C because of that need to be self-sufficient. It's how they're accustomed to learning. So if that's going to be happening, how do we meet those digital natives where they are? Because the issue is with the aging workforce, you can't do anything about people retiring and aging. The challenge is, how can you retain the new hires to get to that point where they're fully productive and they've fully replaced the person who's aged out and moved on? That's what you can do something about, and that's where finding ways to meet digital natives where they're at, with reliable connectivity and with the tools that are more familiar for them for collaboration and just-in-time learning, not to mention being able to follow SOPs and be able to access, various systems that they need to access while out on the floor.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, I think ultimately, we can talk about technology all day, but it comes down to the people and enabling the people, and so it's a really good kind of use cases. So, as you see from this slide, there's lots of different forms of technology that is being looked at, implemented, and those types of things from the perspective of a DC or a warehouse. So what does that mean? It means Actually,
Yep.
I want to speak to,
You want to go to that one first? and
go
then
to
back?
this one first, then we'll
Yep.
go back.
Okay.
This idea that 2/3 of the respondents to the studies, basically said, we're looking at a lot of stuff. So what does that mean for us? It means we're not necessarily equipped for it from an infrastructure perspective. As you see here, it's like almost 2/3 say they weren't really not equipped for planned technology investment. So, but the other piece of it is how do you enable that and how do you fix that issue? And that's private wireless networks is one way. But talk a little bit to this, and then we'll go back to the other one.
Sure. It's probably pretty typical that when you go into the middle of the DC and you try to access the macro network from inside there, depending upon where that DC is located, there's a good chance you're going to have poor coverage, that you might get 1 bar, you might get 2 bars. The macro tower in a dense metropolitan area is probably going to be within 1.5 miles or something like that, probably even closer. If you're in a more semi-rural or remote area, it's likely to be farther away, and it's not likely to be tuned to the type of dense uses and devices you want to add into that environment. So in some respects, the macro network doesn't fit for what you're trying to do with some of these new use cases, especially when it comes to AI. The other option is Wi-Fi. And Wi-Fi is an excellent wireless network technology for objects that aren't moving. What Wi-Fi is engineered for is for shared resources and easy access, and for something that isn't tending to be in motion. So when you think about, and this comes up frequently with AMRs and AGVs that are connected to Wi-Fi, they will tend to hit a certain dead spot and then they'll stop and they'll wait to re-register with the next nearest access point. Access points in Wi-Fi don't talk to one another, so there's not a seamless handoff in Wi-Fi. That's why it's a stationary resource. You can engineer your Wi-Fi to accommodate stationary. When things are moving, it gets a whole lot more challenging. The Murphy's Law of this is that the occurrence of an AMR or an AGV stopping is in direct relationship to whether a sea-level person is on site. It's incredible how frequently that seems to happen. We had one customer that was experiencing about 200 stoppages a day with their AMRs and their AGVs as a result of connectivity. So it was enormously disruptive. That adds up significantly. Is there anybody that doesn't know the difference between an AMR and an AGV, by the way, at this point? Because it's becoming increasingly important to understand that distinction between an automated guided vehicle and an autonomous mobile robot. Because
I
sometimes
just think it's a bunch of
used-
letters, so there you go.
They're used interchangeably. Think of, for AGVs, it's a guided fixed path with some variation permitted, but it's essentially going the same thing. When it gets to automated material handling and having flexible routing and independent routing and dynamic routing, that's where an AMR comes in. That's autonomous. It can go anywhere that you deem that it can go in those types of a zone. So there's a lot more flexibility in the route that it can take on. Okay.
Good stuff. So just from the perspective of kind of a private wireless network,
Yeah.
it's as you see here, 50% of respondents are looking at this and plan to implement. So, it's directly correlated to the amount of technology and access points and things that they need to have in a warehouse these days or at DC. But
Right.
speak a little bit to
When we were developing 5G, when we weren't designing commercials to inundate everybody with, we also spent some time figuring out there's now a possibility of giving customers access to dedicated spectrum and letting them not participate necessarily in the macro network, but having a cellular network for their own purposes. So think of kind of a best of the both worlds scenario. Most customers love the agility and flexibility of Wi-Fi and other wireless technologies, right? But it doesn't meet the security, performance, and reliability requirements that you need, and that's why you use wired connections for PLCs and lots of certain types of systems, conveyance systems and all of that, right? So if you could have that best of both worlds where you had the performance, reliability, and security of a wired connection, and you had the agility and flexibility of a wireless connection, that's what we recognize that 5G could do. And by that point, the cost of radios and core equipment got to the point where we could affordably introduce it for dedicated use in an industrial environment. We're doing it in other verticals, but where we're getting the most traction is in the industrial space. So think of a half rack of equipment somewhere on the site that is connected to radios and antennas where you've got dedicated spectrum that nobody else is able to access that spectrum unless you deem that they can get on it. Because you have this dedicated system, you're not on a data plan for every device you add. So every camera, scanner, AMR, handset, tablet, whatever you add to it, there's no additional cost to do it. So you can scale it dramatically by being able to do that. And because cellular signals propagate farther, and you need fewer antennas than you would access points, there's a significant cost in cabling and in power and environmental and cooling and everything that's required. It's also a 10-year investment. It's not something that has to be refreshed every 3 to 5 years like Wi-Fi does. So what we're telling customers is as you embrace new use cases, private wireless networking may be a viable option. The carpeted areas that are well served by Wi-Fi, the other areas of the DC that are really well served by Wi-Fi, we're not suggesting changes in that. It's where these new use cases that are highly mobile, that are highly visual in nature, or highly have a security requirement or a latency requirement or a guaranteed performance requirement, that's where it comes up. The other area is out in the yard. And one of the things we'll get to here shortly is some information on where people feel that their wireless is weak. And I think it was on that other slide that you had up, was 34% said they had issues out in the yard with connectivity. Wi-Fi is not happy being outside. It doesn't extend very far. You need an awful lot of access points to be able to serve the yard. We had one large consumer packaged goods company that they had such a problem with theft in the yard that they decided that they were going to have a global directive that required cameras on every light pole in the yard with a high degree of resolution on those cameras so they could understand and work with law enforcement to be able to track down the perpetrators and do something about it to cut down on the amount of theft that they were experiencing. Cameras, if you get to a certain point of resolution, such as 4K, that's a 20 meg file that would be continuously uploaded. That's going to overwhelm any wireless network that's not cellular based, because cellular has more capacity within it. The other consideration with this is if you're going to start locating cameras out on power poles, having that bandwidth to be able to come back into the building and not have to run a cable out there, because this CPG company, their initial thought was we're going to run fiber out to these cameras. The problem was they had rail lines, and it was prohibitively expensive to get fiber underneath those rail lines to do that. There's a lot of opportunities for use cases in the yard is the point we want to make. The other is that with cameras, you have to take into account how much bandwidth are we going to start be generating, because in the past, most of the data was coming down to the floor. Very little data was coming off the floor. If you're going to start generating gobs of data with video cameras that have to go somewhere and you're going to connect them wirelessly, that's a whole new consideration for upload that most organizations haven't encountered just yet. To a degree with an AMR and an AGV, you're going to have similar considerations because it's a lot more than just 50 kilobits being sent every 10 or 15 minutes like what might be on an IoT sensor or something like that. So getting a handle on what do we want to do and how much is it going to affect the traffic coming off the floor that we haven't generated in years past. That's where I come back to that point about there's no shortage of great ideas, but a lot of times industrial operators aren't willing to go forward with it because they don't trust their network's going to be able to handle it.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned security, so it's probably a good segue. But hey, by the way, did anybody see the story this weekend? I think it was on CBS Sunday Morning about Guy Fieri and Sammy Hagar's 24,000 bottles of tequila disappeared. What a crazy story. And talk about, I mean, so you know, we're going to talk a little bit about, and that was physical security, but there was certainly an element of it that was that was also you know, cyber in perspective. Yeah. So. Well, they got half the tequila back. So there's still 13,000 bottles of tequila out there somewhere. If anybody can find them, you could probably, you know, okay. So, Cybersecurity, obviously critically important in most of the industries we cover. What we're seeing, the concerns are similar in the space. The big difference is, historically, the employees of a distribution center or drivers, and unlike in say financial services or healthcare, they historically weren't overly concerned employees with cybersecurity protocols. It's not something that is something that ultimately the warehouse workers, really cared much about. They have to care about that now, especially as more technology is coming in. As you see here, ransomware, network vulnerability, from devices. These are all only going to be, a bigger concern as technology is implemented into the operation. So it really comes down. You keep coming back to the human element, and in this case, it's also true. It's just now it's going to come down to better training. Hey, they can watch a video on a mobile device. How about that? Better training and as we get more technology implemented in the warehouse, the endpoints are going to be greater and greater. So securing those endpoints is going to be, kind of even more critical. You want to speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, what's powerful about cellular is, number one, the data is encrypted. And if it's 5G, it's 256-bit encrypted. So it's really, really challenging to unwind that. The other is that in a cellular environment, both devices authenticate with one another on a mutual basis. So it's not just a one-way authentication. Both devices are verifying the authenticity of the other before they start an exchange. Obviously, it's done at incredible speeds that aren't disruptive to the operation. But there's some inherent security aspects to cellular that are superior to other types of technologies. So the other, and Dave touched on this, is that you can make a case that the least trained workers in any enterprise are those on a distribution center floor or a manufacturing floor, because they're the ones that spend the least amount of time with corporate systems. They're getting the least exposure to training videos, to phishing exercises, to the culture and the awareness of what's going on. But in a DC environment, you think of the number of third parties that come on site and the risk that introduces. You think of the amount of IoT sensors that are going to be applied, over the next several years, and all the additional automation that's going to be brought. So there's the attack plane, the surface of threats gets that much broader, and the bad actors are recognizing that industrial environments have the least amount of conditioning and typically the least amount of protection, because this world of OT, cybersecurity is still unfolding. That applying enterprise security principles to an OT environment is not as mature as the rest of the enterprise. So there's more vulnerabilities and weaknesses than before, and the bad actors are exploiting it. Our industry is one of the most attacked sectors across all verticals because of this known vulnerability. Our data breach investigation report, we've done it now for 18 years, is a great source of information on the nature of the threat and the trends and patterns that are going on there. It's called the DBIR. For cybersecurity professionals, it's considered one of the key source documents in the space. It's not just coming from Verizon data. We work with about 70 different partners and collaborators, agencies, partners in the industry, public sector, and capturing this information in a volume that's really highly regarded and becomes that kind of source data for a lot of justification for OT projects.
Awesome. All right, as suspected,
Yep.
we knew we weren't going to have enough time. So I want to talk a little bit about, we talked earlier about kind of computer vision, a form of AI. As you see, it's really getting a lot of traction in the space. And there's lots of interesting use cases and scenarios. You see, obviously, QR code scanning. It comes out on top. Quality control.
That too.
I'm sorry, I missed what happened. Technology. So here's the slide. So quality control is coming on 50%. Security surveillance, to your point earlier. Who knows if that number
Right.
If their, their definition of surveillance is actually computer vision, but I guess you can argue that. But you see, it's becoming, quite popular. The advancements in computer vision, it's one of the more mature, I guess, artificial intelligence applications out there. So there's, lots of, it's a proven technology. So, you want to speak to this a little bit?
Yeah, a little bit too. One of the things, the beauties of computer vision is it's one of the least risky AI technologies to introduce because it's passive, it's observing, right? It's not in the middle of the core value chain. Cameras can be located in such a way that they're not disrupting operations. What we find is that the range of use cases around computer vision are almost limitless. Customers are always finding other ways to do things. It can range from some of the basics about surveillance to PPE compliance to SOP adherence, restricted zone types of situations, slip and fall in areas. What it comes down to is being able to see what can't easily be seen. And as DCs get more and more automated, there's fewer eyeballs in there. So how do you see everything that's going on in a way that's meaningful to the business, and how can you act on that? And it's expensive to wire cameras to do all of that. So the ability to locate cameras flexibly is really interesting. We have some customers that even say, I can't run power to that, so why am I going to have a camera there? Well, there's a cheat code to that, which is refurbished phones have great cameras. They can be, powered for 4 or 5 days taking images, and you're just replacing it with a new camera, a recharge camera, every 4 or 5 days. And it solves an awful lot of problems when it comes to enabling computer vision applications to be realized.
Yeah, and then kind of the broader AI use cases in terms of, what the study and these, I don't have a year-on-year comparison here, but these, are a little bit bigger differences year on year than we talked about with the challenges. But inventory optimization, it comes out number one in many of the segments we work with, obviously retail, those types of things. Route optimization and transportation planning. I mean, the ability to truly understand how to maximize, routes and you can become that much more efficient by leveraging some of these technologies. It can add margin points to any business. So it's really we're really seeing some interesting growth there. And then the labor piece, workforce optimization, been around for a long time. There's various algorithmic technologies that have been applied to workforce now that AI can play a role into it, and again, it can add enhanced efficiency, and then the kind of the automatic decision making for order management. So order fulfillment. Sorry. So good.
Do you want to open up to questions?
Yeah. So any questions? I think ultimately that maybe there was a little bit of a use case that you wanted to share, but any questions before we wrap up? And you guys are. You guys kept your head up almost the whole time. It's pretty good.
We're grateful for that.
Yeah. This study, like I said, will be available. Go ahead.
So when will the study be released and how?
It will be released in the next week or so?
Yeah.
Okay. And it'll be available on our site it'll be available on our site, on the Verizon site, but you can also email that guy behind you.
Yeah, if you want to take a picture of that,
Yeah.
and David will send it directly to you.
Yeah. And, we did have some takeaways, but I think we're at time, so,
And the full report will include a lot more detail
Right.
than we're covering here today.
Right.
So,
Exactly.
And if afterwards, after you've read it and you want to learn more about it, feel free to reach back out to David, and we're happy to have a follow-up conversation with you as well.
Yep. So, well, appreciate you. I'll tell you what, I haven't been to a conference in a long time that we have 45-minute sessions. You guys sitting around for 45 minutes is pretty good. So thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.
Appreciate the time. There you go.